I got to tell you about something that happened to me recently. I was at the McDonald's drive-through and I came in and I went the right way. You come through the entrance and you got to go drive around the building and get into the drive-through. And there's a guy pulling it right behind me who took the wrong way, did a U-turn in a tight little parking lot area where it's not really built for that, and got in front of me. I was immediately behind him in the drive-through, and you can imagine how frustrated that made me because I'm like, seriously, dude? And it made me think about the reality that we find ourselves in this crisis season, in this winter of the Strauss and Howe theory, where people don't respect one another and don't take care of one another. And it points to institutional decay. That's the concept that we're going to be talking about today. And before you judge me and tune me out because I go to McDonald's, we all do things we're not proud of. I'm not afraid to admit I go to McDonald's. I'm not proud of doing it, but we all have our vices, and quick, easy, and convenient is certainly one of mine. I am looking forward to seeing you on the other side of the intro. It's so easy to get lost in the noise, to be consumed by the outrage, the anger, and the constant hum of fear. But if you look past the chaos, you find a landscape of raw mechanics and hard truths, the things that don't change even when everything else is on fire. I'm Jared Lee. I don't focus on the friction of the moment. I'm looking at the wider ground that makes the struggle inevitable. This is the whole field of battle. All right, so here we are, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that drive-through incident. This kind of thing happens all the time. If you're paying attention and if you're watching for it, you'll see just how often it is that people don't help each other. Right? The drive-through people, they got cameras on everything. They could have been like, dude, no, don't go that way. I mean, it even sounds ridiculous when I say that out loud. But once upon a time, people would do that. Once upon a time, people would say, hey, you've got to go through the correct way. This is the way things work. And then they stop. And this is, according to Strauss-Howe, they would argue that this institutional decay is what happens. One way I read it was when the referee leaves the field, the rules are just suggestions, right? People don't care. They'll drive across the curb if they have to because the rules don't matter anymore because no one is enforcing them. This, it's frustrating when we live in a society where this decay has happened. It's certainly it doesn't grease the wheels of social cohesion when people don't play their role well. But because we live in a world where everyone is looking out for themselves because no one else is going to, we have to drive over curbs. We have to pull U-turns. We have to, in some cases, frankly, walk right over one another in order to get what we feel like we want. And so that seems to be happening quite a lot. If we pay attention, we'll see that, right? This is not bad. I mean, we could argue that it is bad. It's uncomfortable, but it's natural. It's what happens at this particular era of history. Think back just for a minute. I mean, we all know probably enough of this recent history to know that people didn't behave that way in the 50s. People looked out for their neighbor. Were there problems with this? Sure. I mean, it was probably pretty common. I don't know. I haven't seen the stats on this. I'm speaking from my head here, but it was probably pretty common in the 50s for, say, a neighbor to spank your child. I mean, we all have certain feelings about that, I would imagine. I'm just saying it probably happened far more often than it happens today. In fact, I think if it happened today, you might be afraid of getting arrested. That's just the reality. But in the 50s, there was a cultural expectation that the neighbors and the friends and the people around you and the people at the McDonald's drive-through, which I'm not sure there were many then, but the people that ran places would uphold the rules and have an expectation that other people uphold those same rules. But that was a spring period. That was when the community, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, so I won't rehash it, but if you've not listened, I will point you back to episode 1, 2, or 3, where I've talked about the cycles of history. Episode 1 gets the fullest picture of it. Fine, I'll do a little bit of a recap if you're new, okay? So, according to Strauss-Howe theory, the spring happens after a crisis. You have some kind of climactic event, usually to close out a crisis. And then it's spring. They call it a high. Everybody feels good about the future. The economy's growing. People are doing their jobs. Everybody's working together. That's the high. And then there's an awakening moment. We look at that. We think that's the 60s. People go, yeah, but there's more meaning. That's the real question. There's more meaning, and I need to find it. Then there's an unraveling period where things begin to dissolve a little, and they start to fall apart. And then there is a crisis period. And each of these periods, according to their theory, take about 20, 25 years. And then at the end of the crisis, there's what they call a climax event. World War II was the most recent one. Some kind of big event that causes everything to sort of resolve and the dust to settle, and then people begin to build back up. And during these high moments, there's great trust in society. There's trust in one another. We depend on each other. We have gone through a crisis together. We've gone through a climactic event together, and we've come to find out that we can be counted on. That's a high. And so we enforce the rules. We look out for each other. And then as the curve begins to drop, we find out that one another are not worth counting on, right? No one's looking out for us. I feel like that statement probably resonates with most people who are alive today, at least those who didn't live through a high, right? As I say that, I think about the 80-year-olds who lived through the most recent high period, and they might say, no, people can be counted on, because they remember when people could be counted on, right? And there's a longing for that feeling. But we know, if we're living in this winter period, that people can't be counted on. Here's what happens. Institutions and organizations, whether those are for-profit or non-profit, are built during a high period for service purposes. Those institutions are developed to meet real needs on the ground for real people, right? Whether it's a church or a bank or a grocery store, it doesn't matter. McDonald's, they grow up for the reason of serving a need. Now, obviously, they also are going to profit from it. Yes, you're going to sell hamburgers and you're going to make some money, but you're doing it knowing that these people want what you're selling and you want to serve them. Now, in my lifetime, and I think if you're about my age, you will resonate with this, or older, I suppose, I have watched the service, no matter where you go, McDonald's, the bank, the grocery store, it really does not matter where you go to do any kind of transaction. I have watched people's desire to serve drop drastically. I mean, we could joke and say this might have to do with the rise of the Karen. You know the Karen, right? We've read and seen all the memes about the Karens. Maybe the Karen is the person who expects what doesn't exist anymore, right? Once upon a time, you could have walked into some place and said, here's my problem, and they would do anything to fix that problem for you. That's just a reality. That's the way people have done things for a long time. And now, I mean, I think you're almost more likely to hear, well, that sounds like a you problem, than, okay, let's see what we can do to fix that, right? That's a, a symptom of living through winter. These institutions, they were built to meet a need, but over time, the life of an institution, any institution really, it doesn't matter what it is, becomes less about what it's supposed to be doing for others and more about self maintenance. They get bigger at the top. It takes more money and capital of assets, whatever kind of resources you've got. You need more of them just to hold the thing up than you use to actually serve the reason that the thing existed in the first place, right? McDonald's takes more money to grow and maintain than it takes to provide hamburgers to hungry people right now. That's the way it is. And institutions always do that. They get to a point where their investment mostly goes into self-maintenance as opposed to the mission for which they were created. If you are confused by that, I work. My real job is I'm in a church. I'm a church pastor, and I'm telling you, mission creep is a problem in nonprofit organizations. We start to get more concerned about holding it together than, our words are evangelism and discipleship, reaching people and growing them up, become less important in institutions like the church than keeping the institution alive. And that's a real crisis. But we are in a crisis period. This is what happens. And when that happens, and this is fascinating, you can see it play out. We circle the wagons, right? You just look at the story, look at the history. Public trust begins to drop. People don't depend on you because you've proven that you can't be depended on. So this begins to happen, and it creates this sort of cycle where a person finds out the institution can't be trusted. They accuse the institution of being trusted, and the institution has to improve itself and make sure that people can trust it. We call this the circle the wagons effect, right? I'm just going to name some stuff, okay? In like the 90s, this is about 30 years ago, suddenly all these news reports started coming out. Remember, the 90s are at the top of the crisis, right? We're through the unraveling, and now things are beginning to really, truly begin to disintegrate into crisis season. In the 90s, there were all these news reports about all these Catholic priests doing horrific things to altar boys and those who were entrusted, you hear the word trust there, those that trusted them to take care of them, and they became exploited and abused. And it was awful, and it was horrific. And there were those, I remember this, I'm that old, there were those who during that period, not the Catholics, others, during that period, can we say schadenfreude? That's a big word. It just means taking a little bit of pleasure at other people's pain. I'm not defending that. I'm just saying it's a reality. And many of those were, if you know this history, many of those people that did that were Baptists, because Baptists and Catholics have a long history of really not liking each other very much. I think that's getting better, but we'll talk about that in a later episode. I should make a note, remind me, because that's really important for the high that's coming. There's some interesting facts there. But the Baptists began to take a little pleasure in the fact that the Catholics were being accused and discovered of all these things. Now, what did the Catholics do? They circled the wagons, didn't they? They denied, they protected, they moved priests to other parishes rather than discipline. And I mean, a lot of that stuff is falling out even years after some of those initial accusations. More and more we were finding out just how much was being covered up and hidden. Maybe 10 years, maybe 15 years. It took a little longer, but a little bit longer. Guess what? Denominations started seeing some of the same kind of mess. Yeah, the Southern Baptists. And what they do, they circled the wagons, right? They denied, they protected perpetrators instead of looking out for victims. I mean, if you've been a part of that, you've seen it. Like, there are websites you can read up on all of the history of all of these things. They circled the wagons. Why? Because it was more important to protect the institution. We have to put all of these resources. Think about the lawyers you got to buy. You got to protect all of these resources at the top rather than protecting the people you were there to serve in the first place. I'm picking on the church because I feel like I'm an insider and I can do it, okay? But it's not just the church. Every organization begins to do that. The customer service 1-800 numbers, they've gotten less and less and less helpful while they're putting more and more and more work into making sure you don't actually need to use them. Right? I mean, we got AI chatbots that you can chat with. Why call Verizon when you can just chat with them online with the machine? You can almost get your questions answered easier. When they're dumping money into those things to protect the institution rather than the customer. Do you see this? This is a normal thing. This always happens. This always happens. The American Civil War, the same thing happened. Think about the Great Depression. That was leading up to, that was the winter period, the most recent winter period. The financial institutions, everything collapsed at the beginning of that winter. Total collapse of the system. We trusted it, right? But the systems grow to such a point that they become brittle and unable to sort of sustain the weight of what they're built to carry. People keep asking me sometimes if this is only an American theory, and I need to reiterate again, it is not. It's civilizational. When you tie the American Revolution period, which I've talked about, to its civilizational counterpart, right? It was all of the Western world that went through this cycle around that time. The French Revolution was a part of that. People talk about the phrase the old regime. That's the Louis, for lack of a better word. All of the French kings who reigned, and there was a certain structure. Do you know that we have lawns today because the rich French rulers wanted to have a manicured lawn, and that's why all of Western civilization now is expected to have a green grass around their house because the old kings and the old regime did it. But they were top heavy, right? There were aristocrats and the kings and all of his friends and all of these people, and they all had these mansions and these houses, and of course they had these manicured lawns and bushes and pretty things. And as that became so big, it was unmanageable. They literally they cut the head off of that. Literally, that's where the guillotine came from. They ended that altogether. Interestingly, these turnings often have to do with financial as well. In the previous cycle leading up to World War II, the global sort of currency, what everyone used for trade, was the British pound. In previous ones, it was the Spanish galleon, which ended at the Spanish Armada, which was a crisis moment in a previous turning. All these things to say, what happens in this final turning at the climax period of a crisis before we enter a new high is old institutions that once could be trusted and once could be depended on begin to collapse and fall. This often triggers, and this is the one that's going to scare people, but it often triggers constitutional crisis type moments. Obviously the French, right? Obviously that was a big one, and American at the same time too. I mean, we had a crisis in our Constitution. We had a king. We didn't like that. We wrote a new Constitution, and we call that a constitutional crisis. I mean, now we sit here and we go, that was a great moment, right? We learned a lot. Wonderful things happened. We developed, a Constitution that I think is actually a really good one. But it was a crisis moment, and it changed everything. And that is questionable, right? We have economic reset. We move from the pound to the dollar. We move from the galleon to the pound, whatever it is. Interestingly, here we're living in a time where AI is quite big and only exponentially growing, and we've got to wonder, what would that do? Number one, you don't even know what's true anymore, right? I've seen the reels, people. I just said it, people talking, and they're not people. It's completely AI. It's amazing, and you can't. I mean, you can, but barely, and that's only going to get better. That could be fake. You might not know. That's what happens. Everything begins to change so much and so rapidly that the institution flips and new institutions need to be created. So here we are, right? We are living in this time. The last, in since 1955, trust in our government has dropped by about 60%. Less. I think it was 78% in 1955 trusted the U.S. government to do what was right. Now it's in the teens. I think it's 17 or 18% of Americans believe that the United States, Washington, D.C. politicians are going to do what's right. That trust demonstrates this institutional decay. We can't depend on arguably our most important institution right now because it's so busy protecting itself. It's busy circling the wagons. It's busy pushing money up rather than pushing services out. That's the way it always works. Along with institutional decay, and this is something I've been thinking about and writing about quite a bit lately, is loneliness. Because as trust goes down, we can't depend on people, right? We get this feeling in our chests, in our hearts, in our lives that people can't be trusted, and so we isolate and we hide. And what do? We end up scrolling memes or reels or whatever. Our whole life is poured into lonely pursuits rather than connectional pursuits. This is a part of the winter season. I had a friend recently tell me a story, and I think this is really relevant. This happened since COVID, so in the last few years. This person left his bag at a table at a restaurant. Someone sitting at the next table, and he just left his bag for a minute, went to the bathroom, and when he came back, his bag was gone and the tip was gone off the other table. And he was like, "What happened?" And the guy sitting right here, 6 feet away, said, "Oh, some guy just came and grabbed it, took the tip off that table too, and ran off." It didn't say a word. And you got to ask, would you? Would you? I think it's worth asking ourselves, would we do that? We've moved, certainly in the last, I'd say even 30 or 40 years. I was going to say 60 or 70, but really in the last 30 or 40, we have moved from being able to count on people to look out for us to it's more likely to expect that nobody will. We have moved from caring neighbors to spectator neighbors. Why do we do that? We're not looking out for each other. In the high, we did, and in the crisis period, we stopped doing that. You want proof? I'll give you proof. Right now, I was just talking about DC. Right now, we've got people whose job it is to enforce the law. Not only not enforcing it, but actually participating in the problems. I'll just reference you to Jeffrey Epstein and his friends. And we all know who many of them are, right? And so as we think about this, and this is a part of institutional decay that we all need to embrace and accept as just a reality. Because what we've done during this crisis period is we have looked at people that we couldn't trust, and we've immediately switched to trusting the other people, right? Because right now in America, we just have two groups, and they're both crazy, but because whichever one we think is worse, we trust the other one. Okay, that's kind of what we do. We go from the worst one to the well, that one can't be that bad. And here's what we need to understand, okay? There are names from both of those groups in those files because none of them can be trusted. And we need to own that. The only thing that's going to get us out of this together is to recognize that neither of those two teams can fully be trusted because both of them are doing self-protecting work, not service work. Okay, we've got to get that. We got to get that through our heads, because what has happened is that picking one of those two teams has created greater isolation. It's created greater fear. How many people, and it's so many now that I've encountered, who have lost friendships because of which team they're rooting for. And that is just not, that just proves the isolation theory, right? Those teams are looking out for those teams' own interests. And if you need proof of that, look at the names in the emails, which many of them they won't let you see. But it'll all come out. Don't worry. It'll all come out, because the institutions are falling apart, right? But here's the thing. Those institutions stop instituting. They stop enforcing the rules. They stop being a referee. People at the next table, they stop enforcing the rules. Everyone's only ever looking out for themselves. And it's a reality. Here's my encouragement. Here's what I'm begging of you. Please don't play their games. Don't play their games. It doesn't matter what team. It doesn't matter. Just don't be a part of it. Don't engage at the level of picking a team. We need to be people who referee the rules. And we need to do that by building community. The only way out is through. That's often said. The only way out is through. These days hurt, right? When we look at something ahead of us that looks hard, you and I, and I think all human beings, have a tendency to try to escape it. This looks hard. I'm going to run the other way. The only way out is through it. We can't escape it by running around it. We're just going to hit it on the other side. It'll outflank us every time. The only way out is through. We have to go through it. And the only way to go through it, and this is so important, please listen to me, the only way to go through it is to go through it together. We can't go through it divided. We have to do it together. This crisis season, if Strauss and Howe are right, and I think they're onto something. I'm not trying to be a prophet, or I'm not trying to tell you these are the way things are going to roll out. That's really not my intention. But they're onto something as they look back, and even in the last 60, 80 years, you can see the same sort of trajectories moving in the same sort of ways. And if they're right, then in the next 5 to 6 to 7 years, we're going to be friends, and we're going to depend on each other, and we're going to believe in one another, and we're going to look out for one another. And when we pull through the drive-through lane, we're going to make sure that, hey, no, you go. That's what we're going to work together in just a few short years. Millennials are called the heroes in the Strauss-Howe theory. That specific generation, the hero arc, whatever. Don't read too much into that. But that generation, who is about that age when things turn around in a high, become the ones to lay the foundations. And look, it's true. Gen X, I'm one of them. I'm sorry, but I'm just going to say it. We, and this is true, this is according to their theory, you can predict it, and we know this is true, we're cynics. We kind of don't trust people very much. We pretty much expect most people to hurt us. That's a Gen X trait. Millennials, you have a high value in community. You want community. Now, I know that community is hard when everything's falling down. Believe me, this is one of my greatest struggles, is developing community while people who are part of that community generally are being part of the winter, being part of this crisis season, are looking out for themselves. And it is impossible to build community where people who are part of the community are self-interested. It's impossible. So millennials, you value community. Here's my ask of you. This is what I'm asking millennials to do. Stop looking out for yourself. Trust. Not the system. I'm not saying trust the system. I'm saying trust one another. Trust the people in your neighborhood. Trust the people around you. Trust the people with whom you involve yourself. That's the people that'll get you through this crisis season. Those are the people who will stand with you and build the next world. You're the ones to do it. I think in episode 1, I talked about victory gardens. Plant a garden and give away the vegetables. Maybe that's it. Find ways to communicate and share information that you can depend on, right? Because if AI does what it does, the TikToks and the Reels and all the stuff, we can't communicate broadly. We need our people. This is part of the reason that I'm so excited about what my job actually is. In spite of the fact that institutional mistrust is an all-time high, and in spite of the fact that probably the institution that I help lead is one of the least trusted, at least within the civilization. I feel like trust of churches has gone down, not least because of some of the things I've already mentioned. I get all that. But I also think the place where I am, the institutions that I help to lead, I think are the best place to build the kind of community where people can be a part of it and depend on one another. I know what I just said, but if we all can work together to deny our own self-interest and trust the other to look out for ours, that's what needs to happen, and it is what will happen. That is what will happen. I'm convinced of that. I'm not convinced that Strauss and Howe are, exact, perfect predictors of everything that could ever happen. I'm not saying that, but I can see the trends. Can't you? It always goes this way, and I am absolutely convinced that one day the world will enter into, our civilization will enter into a season where we depend on each other and we trust each other and we actually believe that that the other will help us. I'm convinced of that because nothing lasts forever. Everything changes. And here's the thing, I would like to live to see that. I can't say I've ever really seen a culture where I would define in that way, but I have seen better than this, and I think I'll see. I do. I believe I will live to see a day when people depend on one another and count on one another and look out for one another. I think that could really happen. I truly do. But millennials, you gotta start that motor. Imagining an old lawnmower or snow blower, where you get out and you pull that rope, and you got to do that a few times, and you got to prime it. You press that button to get the gas in the engine, and you pull that rope back, and and you keep doing it. Millennials, you're the ones I'm asking more than anyone else to start pulling on that rope. Start pulling. It's not going to start right away, but your effort at pulling will begin to warm up the engine, so that when we as Xers and as boomers and as all of the others are finally getting ready, the engine will already be warmed up, and you will have little pockets of community that we can connect to, where we can find space to breathe. I think that's what we need to be doing. And I think over the next 5, 6, 7 years, that's what we need to be focused on. Yes, our institutions can't be trusted. No argument from me. Yes, our government officials are lying to us. Yes. So, we've got a choice. We can yell and complain about that reality, or we can begin to build something that we can trust. We can begin to work to build something together and to find community where we know we have life and hope and a future. I'll let you pick whichever one you're most interested in building. Have a great day. Holler at me if you need anything. I'll always respond as quick as I can.